Mary Magdalene, the woman tradition calls a sinner, but who becomes the most devoted follower of Jesus.
I see Mary Magdalene as one of the most compelling figures in the entire gospel.
A witness to the crucifixion and the resurrection. She is one of the most misunderstood women in the Bible.
She was the first Christian.
Known as a penitent prostitute, was she, in fact, the wife of Jesus?
There's an air of scandal about this.
The Bible tells us little about Mary. Is it possible that everything we've assumed about her is wrong? And could lost Gospels help fill in the missing parts of her story and tell us who really was Mary Magdalene? For many Christians today, Mary Magdalene is revered for her compassionate love for Jesus.
I think Jesus meant everything to Mary.
She was present at the crucifixion, and most importantly, she was present at the resurrection. She's the first person to whom Jesus appears after his resurrection.
Do not weep, nor grieve, nor be irresolute, for his grace will protect you.
Yet when it comes to the details of Mary's life, the Bible says very little. The New Testament mentions her just 12 times.
Mary Magdalene is remarkable. There are so few mentions of her in the Gospels, but they're so central to the story of Jesus, and they've filled our imagination for centuries.
In reality, many of our ideas about Mary are no more than myth. Perhaps the most enduring one is that she is a fallen woman, a prostitute saved by Jesus from a life of sin.
She's very often seen as an extremely seductive, erotically charged woman.
2,000 years on, it has become hard to separate legend from fact in the story of her life. Who was Mary, really? Where did these myths come from? And what is the truth about her relationship with Jesus? The myth that Mary was actually a prostitute stems from one key event described in the Gospel of Luke.
Let's set the scene. Jesus has been invited to lunch at the house of Simon the Pharisee.
And a woman in the city, who was a sinner, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. The Bible describes how a sinner, someone believed to be a prostitute, comes to visit Jesus.
Get away! Get away! Go! Go away! The fact that Jesus allows this woman to just walk in and anoint his feet and touch him is the big deal. He can't possibly be a prophet or a messianic figure. He'd never allow a person like this to touch him.
To those present, it's a shocking provocation. But what's perhaps even more surprising is how Jesus responds.
The disciples are outraged. When Jesus rebukes them, he says that no, forgiveness is accessible to her too. She brings ointment that she uses on his feet, and she cries and then wipes his feet and dries them with her own hair, sort of a symbol of penitence and forgiveness.
The Bible never names this fallen woman, but a myth begins to grow that the sinner in this important story is Mary herself.
The idea of Mary Magdalene, the prostitute who repented,
gives us a character who shows by her penitence that everybody can make it into the kingdom of heaven.
All four of the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, tell a story in which a woman comes to Jesus and anoints his feet with expensive perfume. Not one Gospel of the four canonical Gospels identifies that woman as Mary Magdalene.
How then did Mary's name come to be wrongly associated with this famous episode from the New Testament? The answer, it seems, can be found 5 centuries later with this man, Pope Gregory the Great.
The reason why people think that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute is because in the 6th century, Gregory the Great gave a homily in which he equated Mary Magdalene with the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet. And since that day, Christians thereafter have thought that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute.
I think Pope St. Gregory the Great was not trying to be mean to Mary Magdalene or women. I think it was probably the result of poor scholarship.
By the time we get to Gregory the Great, we not only have a collection of 4 Gospels that circulate together, we have a tradition that says it's okay to blend these stories together.
It is from this mistake that the image of Mary Magdalene as a sinful prostitute emerges. It is a myth that has concealed the reality behind why she became so devoted to Jesus and played a central part in his life and resurrection. Instead, the truth is far more disturbing. According to the New Testament, Mary is possessed by demons, and it is Jesus who saves her. According to the Bible, Jesus' ministry begins near the Sea of Galilee, where he gathers his first disciples.
Here, on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, is the area where the Gospels most often locate activities, miracles, teachings of Jesus.
One of the coastal villages is Magdala. Was it here that Jesus first met Mary?
Mary Magdalene means Mary of Magdala. She was from Magdala, which is just over the hill behind me.
A woman in distress, what the Gospel of Luke calls a case of demonic possession. The woman is Mary.
What we know about Mary is that she's possessed by 7 demons. This would have been a very personally traumatizing condition to have. And she hasn't been able to find any kind of respite from it until she meets Jesus.
According to the gospel traditions, the way that Jesus dealt with specifically severe cases of demon possession is that he would get them to name themselves, and then having named them, then demanding by name that they leave the person.
It's difficult to imagine how profound that moment must be for her, to finally feel free and cured and whole.
Jesus cleaned up her life, and she became absolutely devoted to him.
Maybe that Mary had some kind of mental illness, perhaps it was depression, who knows, but whatever it was, her encounter with Jesus was a life-changing one.
Following Jesus' intervention, She is one of several women who join him as followers.
One of the things about Jesus is that he has a very inclusive group of disciples. It's a very open kind of movement, and included women who a lot of the time might have felt themselves somewhat marginalized. Being with Jesus gave them a sense of identity and self-worth in a way that they often didn't find in ordinary society.
Mary Magdalene seems atypical for a Jewish woman of her time. Most Jewish women in the Galilee would have been in some kind of a domestic setting, either as a daughter or a mother or a wife, but to be out in the wilderness with an itinerant preacher with a name that does not link her to any man is unusual.
But in the case of Mary, it seems her role goes well beyond that of a simple spiritual follower.
One of the things that Mary brought to the Jesus movement was she had money, she had resources. She was one of several women who actually helped support Jesus, who provided for him during his mission.
Fishing was big business in first century Magdala. So if Mary had money, it came from fishing.
Perhaps she owns a fishing business and is using the proceeds from her fishing business to fund the Jesus movement.
We know that Jesus was trying to reach out to women, so he's naturally going to have been looking for influential women in the community who had that credibility, woman to woman, as it were.
Luke describes these women who are supporting Jesus. We have Mary Magdalene, but we also have Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others. So there are a lot of women who are supporting Jesus, which means that they're also following him. And there's a name for people who follow Jesus, and that name is disciple. In any situation where someone's holding the purse strings, they have power. They're in control. So the fact that she's a backer of the Jesus movement, it doesn't mean that she gets to shape Jesus' teaching, but it gives her access to Jesus.
Mary follows Jesus during the many months that he preaches in Galilee. But what happened during that time? An astonishing discovery made in Egypt in 1945 points to one shocking answer.
This is ground zero for those conspiracy theories that there was some sort of a relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Could it be that Mary and Jesus were married? In December 1945, near the village of Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a peasant makes an amazing discovery. Inside an earthenware jar, he finds 13 ancient Christian books that have been buried for more than 1,500 years.
The discovery of all these other texts suggests that what we call Christianity is really a small slice of what these traditions were. It was a much wider field in the beginning. And now, for the first time, in over 1,000 years, 1,500 years, we have a whole wider range.
Though known as Gospels, they are not in the Bible. They are written by different authors than the New Testament. They depict a growing tension between Mary Magdalene and Jesus' other followers.
The Gospel of Thomas, like other sources, suggests that Mary's role among the disciples was deeply resented by some of them, particularly Peter. The way Peter is described is irate and hot-headed and bad-tempered and somebody that's a difficult person.
The Lost Gospel of Thomas points to a surprising explanation for this tension between Peter and Mary. Dr. Nicola Denzi Lewis has come to the Coptic Museum in Cairo to see these non-biblical Gospels.
So there's one particular saying that comes at the very end of the Gospel of Thomas that gives us some really intriguing information about the relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus and the other disciples, and that's the last folio, which is a folio 51. So can we see that one? All right. There it is, beautiful. So in saying 114, we see a little argument, a little dispute, a little scene unfolding.
The Gospel of Thomas tells of an angry episode when Peter vents his resentment against Mary.
Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life.
Tell Mary to leave us because she's a woman and not worthy of life, spiritual life. Similar to the Jewish tradition that women aren't supposed to be taught Torah.
Another lost gospel, that of Philip, suggests a different reason for Peter and the other disciples' apparent dislike of Mary.
So all those tantalizing theories about Jesus and Mary Magdalene being lovers really jump from this one passage, right? This is the juiciest stuff that we've got. This is ground zero for those conspiracy theories that there was some sort of a relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
In the early Christian communities, for the most part, the missionaries were missionary couples. So it makes sense that Jesus himself could have been part of a missionary couple.
As a first-century Jewish man, it would have been incredibly likely that Jesus would have been married during his lifetime.
This is high-stakes stuff. So, if Jesus, the Son of God, was married, maybe he had children. If he had that kind of an intimate relationship, people want to know. And if he had children, that means there might be people wandering around today with sort of holy blood in them.
And there's one page in particular I'm very excited to see, and that is 63, 64. There it is, yeah. There are two moments in the Gospel of Philip that really say something interesting about the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. One is that Jesus refers to Mary Magdalene as his companion or consort. It says explicitly that Jesus loved Mary Magdalene more than the other disciples.
Why do you love her more than all of us?
Why do I not love you as I do her?
And there's another moment where he kisses her. He used to kiss her, and then there's this hole. And so we've lost these words, and we don't know where he kissed Mary Magdalene.
Of all places for there to be a hole, it's there. What did it say? Did it say that Jesus kissed her often on the lips? Or is it something rather less racy, rather less potentially sexualized? Is it just kissed her often on the forehead? Is it kissed her often on the feet?
So if you happen to be a fan of Dan Brown and Da Vinci Code, and you're reading that, there is a scene there where actually they quote from the Gospel of Philip. Jesus loved Mary Magdalene more than the other disciples and used to kiss her often on the mouth or on the lips. This is the passage that he's referring to here. But when we actually see the manuscript, it's just not that clear.
Even in the Nag Hammadi Gospels, there is no reliable evidence of a romantic relationship between Mary and Jesus. But these alternative accounts do support the Bible story that Jesus and Mary were very close.
The idea that the Gospels would not mention a wife, if there was one, doesn't make any sense. So most likely, Mary was a very close friend of Jesus and a follower, but not his wife.
What the Gospel of Philip clearly says is that there is some kind of a favored relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that Jesus does care for her more than the other disciples. And that's all it really tells us.
But some scholars believe the Nag Hammadi texts do reflect a genuine tension between Mary and Peter.
I think the tension that's reflected in some of the texts outside the Bible, non-canonical texts, I think they do really reflect a tension between Peter and Mary.
The negative depiction of Peter is consistent, and the idea that Mary is not properly heard or respected is also consistent across the sources, which leads many of us to suspect that there might be a grain of historical truth there.
But whatever truths they may contain, the Nag Hammadi texts are not considered as reliable as the New Testament Gospels, written decades earlier.
What's striking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is that they're first century documents. Early on, the Christian movement crystallizes around those, and as other ones pop up, they're not trusted and they're not, in a sense, authoritative like those first four Gospels.
What the New Testament tells us is that Mary is at Jesus' side at the time of his crucifixion.
Mary Magdalene, along with one or two others of Jesus' female followers, were with him throughout. They never left his side. They followed him all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem, all the way to the cross.
She's a follower. She's a believer. She's committed to this.
After following him for many months, Mary Magdalene's loyalty to Jesus is about to be put to the ultimate test. Just days before he will die on the cross, Jesus takes his followers into Jerusalem for the Jewish Passover. On the night that Judas will betray him, Jesus invites his disciples to share a Last Supper.
Jesus has to have the Last Supper in secret because he can't let the authorities know where he is going to be, because it's very important that he finish his last teaching and his Last Supper before he is seized and arrested violently. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, they're not there at the Last Supper, but the reason they're not there is because Jesus knows that he's about to be betrayed. And this arresting, this seizing could be very violent. It could be very dangerous.
Following his betrayal by Judas, Jesus is arrested, tried, and sentenced by Pontius Pilate to be scourged and crucified.
The men had fled because the men could have been arrested with Jesus for insurrection as he was. They could have been crucified as well.
Jesus called the disciples to follow him, and the one thing that they have failed to do, many of the disciples, is to follow Jesus at the most crucial moment of all, which is to the cross. But Mary has understood this, and she's followed him to the cross. She's succeeded where many of the male disciples have failed.
How difficult it must have been for Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene. The last they saw Jesus was probably in the temple teaching, in public, healthy, vibrant, alive.
It says a lot about the commitment of Mary and the other women and their dedication to Jesus and their willingness to be with him in these tough moments, that they do go to the crucifixion scene.
I think Mary and the other women demonstrated their willingness to go even unto death with Jesus. They were there for him. And they weren't sure that there was going to be life after Jesus for them.
Mary sees his shredded flesh. Mary sees the crown pressed against his brow. Mary sees his blood pouring over his skin. She hears him cry. She feels his agony and somehow knows that this is all for love.